Well, thank you for the turnover. I know we had some technical difficulties there. So quick background, today's presentation is going to be a little bit different than what many of you are used to seeing when you see DoD presentations. For the most part, when you look around the environment, you see the big systematic and programmatic groups and what they're doing with AM. And all of us know it's not that easy. So today I put together a series of slides to talk about the larger viewpoint of how the military is made up, how the different entities inside of it interact with each other, and we'll cycle back at the end to really show why is it so hard to do something this new and this fast inside of this ecosystem. So quick background on myself, which will become relevant throughout this presentation. I was a sailor in the United States Navy for 11 years. In my last few years, I was lucky enough to do, let's just say, a few AM projects that got noticed by folks. And my last tour of duty was at the engineering hub for naval aviation. So I left the service in 18 full time to support that effort. And I have been doing it ever since. But all told, I've been with the team since December of 15, and watching it just flourish to where it is today, to how it began, has been fascinating. So if you're ready, let's jump to slide 2. Oh, well, hopefully everybody's slides update faster than mine. Cool. So I said that my perspective was that of an enlisted sailor inside of naval aviation. So really what I wanted to show in the series of slides is how everything fits together. There's a little animation built in there that is going to be covered up, but that's okay. So right, if you look in the middle of the screen, there are 3 levels of aviation maintenance. The organizational at the bottom, that's what many call tip of the spear. Those are your forward deployed units. They're supported by intermediate maintenance facilities. Now, those organizational capabilities have some basic repair capabilities for the aircraft. They're deploying out with it. They can move things in and out, put new parts in, and they have some limited repair capability on the aircraft itself. Then you have the intermediate maintenance facilities. Those are mostly ground side, although you do have small detachments that forward deploy to support larger units as well. And you do have some based in the Navy on the carriers. And then you have the depot levels. The depot levels are going to be the deepest level of maintenance that you could do on a component. So anything beyond that depot can't handle is pretty much scrapped at that point. Depot is also where they completely overhaul an aircraft. They will strip it all the way bare bones and rebuild it as part of scheduled maintenance activities. So those are the real 3 tiers and foundations of aviation maintenance inside of that. So I put representatives from actually my time in service. So these were squadrons and organizations that I was part of. So you'll see here that there's also all these feeding factors. If you look to the right, in a forward deployed location, it isn't just the flow of maintenance and the parts that go inside of it. You then have reporting criteria. So your local squadron will be reporting to a wing, to an aviation wing. All of the different squadrons of that platform are inside of a nook called the wing, and the wing helps coordinate things at the level across those different squadrons. And then higher than that, when you deploy out, depending on what squadron, and you might be part of a CAG group. The CAG group is also what goes inside and would deploy with the carrier group. And so that's the larger air wing that encompasses more than one type of aircraft. So squadrons within squadrons within squadrons. And that all has to do with reporting who has authority over who directs what to happen, and at some level how the commands operate. So that's the organizational level and chains of command that exist just within the military units themselves. Now you have all of these outside entities that weigh in. For instance, if you're dealing with aircraft parts and supplies, which many of you are interested in the additive space, you have groups called DLA, the Defense Logistics Agency, and NAVSUP in our case. And just a little reminder here. This is to show this little segment inside naval aviation, but this is a perfect representation across the services on how complicated these systems can be. So for instance, when we're talking about DLA, Defense Logistics Agency, they oversee parts and components into all of the services, mostly at what is called the repairable level, parts that you can repair, versus little things that are mostly going to be called consumables. In this case, for the Navy, it's going to be supplied by NAVSUP, the Naval Supply Systems Command. Now, both of those entities have specific requirements when related to either AM parts, or if we're talking about AM material, the classification, storage, and shipping associated with all of that, let alone getting it to the units, how it's stored, all of that. So you have these outside entities weighing in on, the active duty tip of the spear guys on, hey, if you want parts, here's what you need to do. Here's how we're going to get them. All of that weighs in. And then to the right here, there's all these other entities, mostly in support of the larger department of the Navy, instead of just the little active duty component, where you have Naval Engineering services, you've got the administrative services, you've got the training commands. Now, if we're looking at this from the perspective of deploying, for instance, AM equipment, if you're deploying AM equipment, you need to make sure that the things like the material is sourceable with those support activities we were talking about, DLA and NAVSUP. You need to make sure that all the consumables in place, that the tools are in place. You need to make sure that at the local unit, they have the right procedures and personnel to support that. You need to ensure that at the wing level, they have the right procedures to support that in the wing, and so on. Then we go back into here. You need to make sure your engineering authorities and logistics have all of these things laid out. The documentation is approved, that everything is in that order. You have the administrative entities. These are the ones that are going to control things like your workforce development, what's in our case, what sailors and Marines go where, how they go about getting their training, what does formalized training look like. I take that back. It's more of the how does training get there? Then you got the training entities. The training entities, in this case, get their influences from the engineering community for how to go about and what's needed inside of that training. So all of these things weigh in across all these different organizations you can see to make up this tiny little part of the ecosystem. And as we mentioned before, this is just naval aviation. So now imagine you take this and you're deploying here. If we go to the next slide, you'll see that when it comes to an actual deployment, this is the makeup of day-to-day life activity for parts. But now you could be dealing with a forward deployed location. So that aviation squadron could be operating inside of a ship. Now you've got all the ship-based criteria, and that whole chart is kind of done over again because those ship-based criteria are done with a different engineering group, a different administrative group, the same training group. So that's kind of cool. And the same supply constraints. So now you've got even more rules for being forward deployed and more considerations to factor in. And then you could be part of not only just the shipboard evolution, now you can be part of a much larger group called the carrier group, which has an entirely different way of operating, how they handle even supplies between the ships, between the commands, everything. You just have this larger and larger building ecosystem of rules, regulations, procedures, people to report to, all in this community. So if we go to the next slide. And on top of all of this, there is this new, it's not necessarily new, but there's this environment that needs to be considered, and it is the cyber realm. Cyber affects all of this, making sure that the supply chain stood up are within regulations and will not be susceptible to foreign adversaries. The same thing we all know AM rides on the back of the digital thread, making sure that the digital infrastructure that's set up, that is a combination of engineering, administrative, and the supply system, all of that is deployed in such a way that it is safe. All of this wraps up into cyber and getting approvals and everything ahead of time to orchestrate all of this. You have to have these systematic plans on how you're going to implement AM here, how it's going to be affected here, who has to be involved here, and then overarching, how is this full package going to be cyber compliant and cyber safe? It's an ordeal. It's not as easy as most people think to put printers on a site and 3D print parts. There is a much larger ecosystem here, um, and this is why things are slow. They're procedural. This is the bigger picture that many of you don't see when you are talking about how the DoD is implementing AM, and you have a couple nice working flow charts. There's all these different entities with different areas of authority overseeing that take a small part of the ecosystem. If we go to the next slide. Now, that was a nice overview to show the picture. Just doing a deep dive. Now, all of those organizations we just talked about, they have subcomponents. Here's an example for you is just Naval Engineering. On the slide we just saw, this was a blip at the top right saying that, hey, engineering has influence into the AM ecosystem. Look at all of this. These are all the different engineering authorities as part of the Dawn. You've got NAVC, we mentioned before, that are going to oversee the shipboard applications, what gets put on ships, how it's done safely, how the ships get repaired. You've got the Naval Air Systems Command, or NAVAIR, which covers all of naval aviation. You've got the Naval Information Warfare Systems Command, formerly known as SPAWAR, which is now NAVWAR. And then you've got NAVFAC, NAVSUP, and the Marine Corps System Command. With the Marine Corps, what's interesting is they are part of the Department of the Navy, but in a lot of ways they have their own organizations built up inside. So there's a Naval Training Command, there's a Training and Education Command, the TCOM for the Marines. There's HQ and there's HQ. So sometimes these are duplications of effort. What you, for instance, with training, what you may do with one group, you have to duplicate over and make sure it's accepted by for another group, even though it's part of the same ecosystem. Jumping to the next slide. And I know that we're coming up on time. I just wanted to give you all some references inside of that. We talked about how the commands operate. Now let's look at some groups that many of you may know, you may have heard before, and how they kind of work into this ecosystem. Next slide. So many of you are going to be familiar with, hopefully, the Air Force Rapid Sustainment Office. The RSO has been a real powerhouse in AM the last few years, ever since they held the Additive Manufacturing Olympics. For those of you who participated, wonderful evolution. I hope we see more of that in the future. So now you have a whole program office dedicated towards advanced manufacturing, and they are definitely a go-to with a public-facing portion. So look, I encourage you all, look them up, communicate with them. They do a lot of projects, and as I mentioned before, they are forward-facing. So it's not just internal DoD. Next slide. Next, we're going to talk about a term in this environment. The military community, and the DoD rather, has been throwing around different things called centers of excellence for a very long time. I really congratulate the Army here because they've done such a wonderful job of annotating. This is our center of excellence, the Rock Island Arsenal Joint Manufacturing and Technology Center. This is our center of excellence for advanced manufacturing. AM fits inside of this. So there's no question who they are for all of the branch of the service, how to contact them. Once again, they're also another group that is excellent and forward-facing with a very impressive facility. Next slide. So those are two formal groups that are stood up within the departments as additive manufacturing, where they can do it across the organization. Now, America Makes, taking a step higher, is a wonderful group. I sure hope all of you have heard of them before. But they are this public-private partnership for additive manufacturing, tech, and education that all the services can work in. So this can work with private industry. This can work with academia. So this is a wonderful place to meet people, to collaborate, to work on projects, and really advance AM, as well as getting a picture of where we're going. They do some wonderful presentations each year where they get the input from the services on different roadmaps and where we're going with AM. Very much forward-facing. Next slide. If any of you are familiar with SBIRs and STTRs, different opportunities for working for small business, and on the academic side, many of you will know AFworks then. AFworks is still doing most of the work for the Space Force as well. Now the Space Force is branching out. A lot of people are trying to figure out how to do work with the Space Force, and not being in that community, the nearest thing I could say is contact AFworks and such, the entities that were doing all those space operations inside of the Air Force, and they will help direct you if they still don't have cognizance over it. So AFworks is a really well put together group. I appreciate how, unlike a lot of the other innovation teams, and this is what we've gone into past the America Make slides, we're going into innovation, not just AM, where AM plays a part of it. They really do well for their forward deployed Air Force members. So the airmen, I really appreciate them for doing that. Next slide. Now we have, this is still inside the larger DoD innovation community. This is the National Security Innovation Network. They do some wonderful things. They move some projects. They also support AFworks in a lot of ways formally with their SBIRs and STTRs. They're another good group that is completely forward facing. You can Google them, look them up, and see how to collaborate. And they have specific projects and programs for different aspects. Next slide. Much like AFworks does for the U.S. Air Force, you have Naval X for the Navy. So they are a forward-facing branch. Everyone can look into it. If you're in the continental United States, you might even have a regional hub near you. And the whole part of those hubs, as we see below, those tech bridges, there's 17 currently, and they're always expanding, is to work with the local ecosystem to push innovative ideas and projects. Really great organization as well. And then if we jump to the next slide, this is a truly impressive map. This is a map of the DoD innovation ecosystem as a whole. So look at all of these nodes. You have different parts here for the Air Force, for the Navy, for the Marine Corps. Every branch is represented here, and there's little outliners for each. So these are all wonderful organizations. I didn't even count this, but I don't know, we'll guess 100. So maybe all 100 are involved in innovation, and AM definitely still fits inside of innovation circles for most things. You'll see here to the left, things like the RSO and Rapid Sustainment Office are on this as well, along with AFworks, CyberWorks, Kessel Run, all of these things. So groups that you're normally used to hearing fit inside of this larger innovation ecosystem. So for many people, they'll say, hey, I had a project over here, it got funded, it's approved. It's part of this much bigger network, and it's very confusing, but there are organizations out there, many of which we've mentioned already, that are actively engaged with the different nodes that can help you navigate these things. There's tons of volunteer services out there dedicated towards innovation inside of the Navy, inside of the military as a whole. So it's not hard to get a hold of people to try to help AM in these circles, and even be a supporting role. Volunteering within different groups like NSIN, Naval X, AFworks, being there when those active duty questions come up for additive. Also, joining America Makes. I can't mention that enough. I'm a huge advocate for them. But being a part of that ecosystem and just being there when questions come up, being part of those virtual conferences is huge to supporting this ecosystem and really understanding how all of this fits in. So lastly, funding is a crazy thing that is just tied up in this whole network. So throughout this chain, money goes in, money goes out. If anybody wants to ever learn more about how to do business with the Department of Defense, supporting the Department of Defense, one of the things I really recommend is learning how the money flow works, how different things get funded and from whom. There's a lot that you can do even at your wherever you happen to be located. If you're in any of the states, talking to your local Congress people and advocating for AM, there's a lot of good that can be done, and it fits into this larger ecosystem. Okay, I think we made it.
It seems like we did so. Well, you did so. Thank you very much, Mike. Thanks for all the insights and all the very interesting information.